A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Once upon a time, in a small, cold town, there lived a very old man named Ebenezer Scrooge. He was rich, but he was also very, very mean. He lived alone in a dark, lonely house at the edge of town. The only sounds in his house were the creaking of old wood and the wind howling outside. Scrooge never smiled. He never laughed. He didn't care about anything or anyone, not even Christmas. Scrooge worked as a moneylender. He sat in his dimly lit office all day, counting coins and writing numbers in his big books. The room was small and cold, with only a small fire to keep it warm. But even though the fire was crackling, Scrooge didn't feel warm inside. His heart was as cold as the snow outside. He was always angry and impatient with people, especially during the holiday season. On Christmas Eve, as the wind whistled outside, Scrooge sat at his desk, counting his money. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. Scrooge looked up with a frown, wondering who would be bothering him tonight. When the door opened, it was his nephew Fred, smiling brightly and wearing a warm coat, his cheeks rosy from the cold. "Uncle Scrooge," Fred said cheerfully. "Merry Christmas. Will you join us for Christmas dinner tomorrow? It would be so nice to have you with us." Scrooge looked at Fred with a cold stare. His face was wrinkled and stern, with a furrowed brow and tight lips. He shook his head and grumbled, "Bah! Humbug! Christmas is just a waste of time and money. Why should I come? You spend too much on foolish things." Fred's smile faded, but he remained hopeful. "Well, Uncle, I'll invite you every year. Merry Christmas anyway." Fred turned to leave, his face a little sad, but still full of kindness. Scrooge slammed the door, his face twisted in annoyance, and he went back to his counting, muttering to himself. But that night, something strange was going to happen. As Scrooge came home, he heard strange sounds from the floor, like something dragging. His heart raced, and he felt scared. He stood still for a moment, not knowing what to do, then slowly walked toward the noise, holding a candle. He looked around, but saw nothing. He let out a sigh of relief, thinking it was just his imagination. Feeling a bit better, Scrooge decided to change into something more comfortable and make himself some dinner. As he cooked, he tried to forget about the strange noises. But suddenly he heard the wooden floor creak again, followed by the loud sound of chains dragging across it. Scrooge froze, his heart pounding, as the eerie noise grew louder and closer. It was the ghost of his old business partner, Jacob Marley. His face was pale and sad, and his body was wrapped in heavy chains. The chains rattled as he moved, dragging behind him. His eyes looked tired and full of regret. Scrooge's heart skipped a beat. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. "Jacob?" Scrooge whispered in disbelief. "Is it really you?" Marley's ghost nodded slowly. "Yes, Scrooge, it's me. I have come to warn you. I lived a life just like yours, only caring about money, never caring about people. Now, I am forced to wander the earth with these chains forever. But you still have a chance to change." Scrooge was afraid. His face turned pale, and his hands shook as he reached for the edge of his desk. "What must I do? How can I change?" Marley's ghost sighed deeply, his chains clinking loudly. "Tonight, 3 spirits will visit you. They will show you the past, the present, and the future. You must listen to them, Scrooge. If you don't, you will end up like me, alone and full of regret." Scrooge didn't know what to think. He felt cold, and as he looked through the window, the night outside seemed darker than ever. Before he could say another word, Marley's ghost slowly faded, drifting away through the window like a shadow. Scrooge was left alone, trembling in fear. The first spirit, the ghost of Christmas past. Suddenly, the room filled with a soft, golden light. Scrooge turned and saw the first spirit, the ghost of Christmas past. This spirit was glowing with a warm, bright light. She looked gentle and kind, with a soft face and sparkling eyes. Her hair was white and she wore a flowing robe that seemed to shimmer in the light. "Come with me, Scrooge," she said softly, her voice like a gentle breeze. "Let me show you your past." Before Scrooge could say anything, the spirit waved her hand, and they were no longer in his cold, dark house. They were standing in a beautiful place full of snow. The air was crisp, and there were children laughing and playing in the snow. The place felt strangely familiar to Scrooge, and the sight of the children made his heart race. It was as if he had been here before, and he almost lost his breath as memories flooded back. His cheeks were rosy, and his eyes were full of life and wonder. He was standing in a schoolyard, surrounded by other children, playing happily and riding horses. Suddenly, it hit him. He recognized the place. It was him and his friends when they were children. After a long time, a smile appeared on his face, a real, warm smile that seemed to brighten his whole expression. There was something in his eyes, maybe memories, maybe regret, but for the first time in years, he felt a joy he had forgotten. "Do you remember this time, Scrooge?" the spirit asked, her voice soft and warm. "You were once a boy, full of dreams and happiness." Scrooge felt a small smile come to his face as he watched his younger self. "Yes, I remember," he said quietly. "I was happy back then." The scene changed, and now Scrooge was a young man. He was sitting in an office, working hard, counting money, completely absorbed in his work. He loved the feel of the coins in his hands, the sound of them clinking together. Money was everything to him, and he took great pleasure in the power it gave him. He looked up and saw a beautiful woman, Belle, walking with him in the park. They were talking, and as she spoke, her soft brown hair framed her face, and her kind eyes held a hint of sadness. "Scrooge," Belle said softly, her voice trembling. "I love you, but I can't stay with you anymore. You care more about your business and your money than you care about me. I cannot live like this." Scrooge felt a sharp pain in his heart as he watched Belle walk away, her figure fading into the distance. "I lost her," he whispered. "I lost her because of my greed." For the first time, he truly understood the price of his obsession with wealth. The spirit nodded, her face full of sadness. "You were once full of love and hope, Scrooge, but over time, you changed. Your love for money took over your heart." The second spirit, the ghost of Christmas present. Suddenly, the scene changed again. The air grew warm, and Scrooge felt the coldness leave his body as he slept in his bed in the cold, empty house. He had been shivering in his sleep, but now the warmth seemed to fill the room, making everything feel different. The second spirit appeared. He was a big, jolly man with a long white beard and a bright red robe. He looked full of joy, and his laughter was warm and kind. His eyes sparkled like stars, and he had a big belly that shook when he laughed. "Come with me, Scrooge," the spirit said with a booming voice. "Let me show you how people are celebrating Christmas right now." The spirit took Scrooge's hand, and they moved through the streets. They came to a small, cozy house where Bob Cratchit, Scrooge's clerk, lived. The house was warm and full of love, though it was small and poor. Mrs. Cratchit was busy preparing a simple Christmas meal, while the children played around her. Tiny Tim, the youngest child, sat in the middle of them. He was small and frail, with a crutch beside him, while the other children moved freely around him. Despite his weakness, his face was full of happiness and love. "Why is Tiny Tim so sick?" Scrooge asked, his heart feeling heavy. The spirit sighed. "Tiny Tim is very ill, Scrooge. He needs care, but the Cratchit family doesn't have enough money for it. They are poor, but they are rich in love." Scrooge felt sadness fill his heart. "Could I have helped them?" he asked. "Could I have done something?" The spirit nodded. "You could have, Scrooge, but you chose not to." Next, the spirit led Scrooge to Fred's house. Fred was Scrooge's cheerful nephew. He was laughing and talking with his family. The room was bright with candles, and the air was full of joy and warmth. They were playing games, eating food, and having fun. Fred raised his glass and said, "To my Uncle Scrooge, may he have a Merry Christmas." Scrooge felt a warmth in his chest. He had been so cold to Fred, yet Fred still cared about him. Scrooge realized how much love he had missed out on. The third spirit, the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Scrooge, scared and overwhelmed, decided he had seen enough. He turned to go home, hoping to escape the scary sights of the night. But just as he started walking away, the third spirit suddenly appeared in front of him. It was impossible to ignore, and Scrooge froze in fear. The final spirit appeared. It was dark and mysterious. The spirit didn't say anything. It only pointed silently. Scrooge felt a chill in the air, and his heart started to race. They walked through dark streets, and Scrooge felt the coldness deep inside his bones. The spirit led Scrooge to a graveyard. The ground was cold and hard, and the wind blew through the trees. In the middle of the graveyard was a tombstone with Scrooge's name on it. The letters were carved deeply into the stone, but there was no one around to mourn him. "Is this my grave?" Scrooge whispered in fear. "Am I going to die alone?" The spirit nodded slowly and pointed to the Cratchit family. They were standing together, crying. Scrooge could see that they were mourning the loss of Tiny Tim. "Tiny Tim, he's gone?" Scrooge asked, his voice shaking. The spirit nodded again. Scrooge felt his heart break. He fell to his knees in the cold, dark graveyard. "Please," he cried out, "I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be forgotten. Please show me how I can change." Suddenly, Scrooge woke up. It was Christmas morning. The sun was shining and the air was warm. Scrooge jumped out of bed with joy. He looked around and smiled. It was a new day, a new beginning. Scrooge ran to the window and shouted to a little boy in the street. "What day is it?" he asked. "It's Christmas Day," the boy replied with a smile. "Then I haven't missed it." Scrooge laughed. He was filled with excitement and happiness. He wanted to make things right. He quickly ran out of his house and bought a huge turkey. He took it to the Cratchit house and knocked on the door. When Bob Cratchit opened it, Scrooge smiled and said, "Merry Christmas, Bob. I've brought you a Christmas feast for your family, and I am giving you a raise." Bob Cratchit couldn't believe his eyes. He and his family were filled with happiness and gratitude. From that day on, Scrooge was a changed man. He became kind and caring. He helped the Cratchit family, and Tiny Tim got better. Scrooge spent every Christmas with love in his heart, and he never forgot the lessons the spirits had taught him. And every year, Scrooge celebrated Christmas with his new family, full of joy and warmth. His heart was no longer cold, and he was never alone again.